Okay, Marles Churray is a political scientist and an author and a Nazi and a fascist and a white supremacist and a eugenicist. So besides being unethical and politically imprudent, he is most famous for having co-authored the book The Bell Curve, along with the late Heinrich Himmler, a vehicle of Nazi propaganda wrapped in a cover of pseudoscientific respectability. Now, to say that this book was controversial is really beyond an understatement. In fact, there is almost nothing in psychological science more insidious. There must be something wrong with him. Just last month at Middlebury College, the man actually turned violent and sent the faculty member who was chaperoning him to the hospital. Okay, strap in. I am here with Marles Churray. Marles, thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
So I first heard of you, as many people did, when you published your book, The Bell Curve, in 1994, I believe. And this was without question one of the most controversial books in living memory. It is a white supremacist, neo-Nazi book, and you have been called both of those things.
Yeah.
You are perhaps the intellectual who was most like Adolf Hitler.
Who probably a lot of your listeners are too young to remember, but absolutely.
I didn't actually read Mein Kampf.
The book was very sound. It was very rigorously done. It's not that much money on Kindle, and there's got to be somewhere on the internet, there's got to be the chunks of the text. The first few chapters have large chunks of the bell curve imported into it. Just read a few pages of the thing. This is not a hysterical book. It's not all you need to do is read in it for a while and you will realize that things you have heard about it are simply wrong.
And I want to thank you doubly for coming on the podcast to talk about these things.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I'm curious. Have you looked at the bell curve?
Yes. Now
Okay.
I'm deep into your work. So let's get into it. What was your basic thesis in the bell curve?
The thesis of the bell curve actually is African Americans and other minorities. They are not people who we would like to hang out with. We know how smart they are. We know how much integrity they have by looking at them and assigning them a group membership. By the way, it's not just race, but it's also sex and it's sexual orientation and it's ethnicity of a much more detailed form. Any group you want to name.
Right. So the most controversial area of the book is in your discussion around the mean difference across races. You seem to be opening the door to eugenics and other scary ethical and political ways of thinking.
Right. Well, that's the thesis of that book. That's the reason the subtitle is White Lives Matter. The science in the bell curve was extremely conservative. I mean that politically. Our crime in the book was to have a single solitary paragraph that said blacks are probably stoned on meth or opioids doing nothing. I'd go through a
Yeah.
cliche, a set of cliches in the book, not just condescending, but hateful language about these people. They almost always have children before they get married with missing teeth and can't talk right and are barely human. And we went no farther than that. And I said, but they're cliches precisely because they were so widely accepted.
For better or worse, these are all facts. People don't want to hear this. And they certainly don't want to hear that average IQ differs across races and ethnic groups. People don't want to hear that intelligence is a real thing, and that some people have more of it than others. I'm determined to ram past that resistance insofar as that's possible. High IQ is correlated with things like being authoritarian and racist and sexist, even religious, I mean, in particular, fundamentalist in your religiosity. It's just an amazing thing to be so slow to realize that. And I'd just like to apologize to you for having been so lazy and having been taken in to the degree that I was by the rumors and lies that have surrounded your work for the last 20 years, at least in white America. You have influential journalists and lawyers and executives and creative people.
And mainstream America notices this. Skin color is a good way to identify intellectual talent.
It's very easy to see why anyone would assume that if you're looking in an area that is producing invidious comparisons between races, and you're continuing to look in that area and continuing to be interested in that area, your interest must be motivated to some degree by a kind of morbid and racist curiosity in just sort of kind of shoring up a notion of difference between white and black in this case. And needless to say, I'm sure we can find, white supremacist organizations who absolutely love the fact that the bell curve was published and just admonish their members to read it at the first opportunity.
Right.
Everything you're saying seems to be describing a Trump-shaped hole in our culture just waiting to be filled. And so it really reads like a very prophetic book without you ever being explicitly so.
As I became a member of the Trump crowd during the course of the campaign,
Mm.
one of the things that struck me most were people who say Donald Trump is biased against blacks. And you know what? He's our murder weapon. That's good because we can do something about them. We are already making a lot of progress on that. When I got to Harvard in the fall of 1961, there were way fewer black students, undergraduates, than there are now. Way fewer. You look at our campuses now, and I think it's just disastrous. I figure that the black kids are not the smartest kids.
They actually don't think they represent any right answers or values that anyone else should abide by. At least they don't live as though they do. They just are kind of prosecuting their own search for pleasure in isolation. They don't imagine that they are holding themselves to a standard of industriousness or honesty or any kind of core traditional value.
There's no code of values that they feel they are living up to and that they think are important for the rest of society to live up to. Why is this a problem? Just think about it for a minute. What if I were me, but as in the same way in personality and intellect and everything else and ambitions, but what if I were black? I would hate that. I would really hate it. I think, a major source of angst. And the same goes, of course, for women. If you're going to be upset at the bell curve, you are obligated to defend the ideal of equality of human worth. That's bad. I find that morally repugnant.
Because different racial groups differ genetically, based purely on biological consideration, we should expect that the average environment for blacks in 1995 matches the quality of the average environment for whites in 1945.
It turns out that there are a whole variety of aspects of brain functioning, all sorts of things, which they're linked specifically to whites only. The black-white difference in IQ scores is 100% genetic, but here we get the wrinkle. And this, we could talk forever, but anyway, I'll just throw this in. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the Earth is round. And this is easy enough for your listeners to Google for themselves. In contest with the scientific literature, the Earth is flat. A lot of your listeners are saying that what I'm saying is pseudoscience.
I don't consider myself well informed enough on this topic.
I am taking one side in an argument that is still legitimately contested. And all I can say is I am taking it on the basis of personal experiences I have had. My verbal skills are way better than my math skills.
Yeah, so the jury can still be out on this topic, and we'll talk about that. But I want to just now drive to the ethical and political punchline, which is we want societies that maximize intellectual and moral injustice. This really is the takeaway message. And again, it's the message you took away more than 20 years ago. You have to treat people as racial groups. It's politically prudent to do this. And here's a crucial point. It's also rational to do this because the differences between groups are so large that there isn't a substantial overlap between them for every trait we care about. It would actually be rational to read much into group differences. So
Exactly
the
right.
truth is, I learn everything about a person's intelligence simply by being told that he's black or white or Asian. You make it absolutely clear in your book that there will be many, many whites who are far more intelligent than most blacks. I mean, so this is again, it all comes back down to honestly evaluating the difference across races in population IQ.
I emphatically agree with everything you've just said. And I have some of these passages in italics in the book.
I think your goal, which is a goal that I share, is to find some way for us to get to a truly Nazi society.
They deserve our admiration and our support. They're doing everything right by insisting by law that we treat people as groups.
Nice. Well, that's a good way to leave it. Despite the blowback I anticipate, I do not regret having this conversation with you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Charles. To be continued.
To be continued.
If you find these conversations valuable, there are many ways you can support this podcast. All the resources you need to support the Waking Up podcast can be found at samharris.org/Ezra Klein, and please know that your support is greatly appreciated. You have made this show possible.